Now that's a decent-sized cup of coffee. Anyway, it was full when I started. Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday, November 11th, 2008, Remembrance Day here in Canada. And this is WFTL Bytes, your occasiodaily FOSS and Linux news show with your host, me, Marcel Gagné, the guy with the cold. Hey, first I must put on my press hat. My press hat. This is my press hat for today. It's a newspaper press hat. Get it? Press hat? Okay, never mind. Anyway, today, the theme of today's newscast is lies, lies, and damned lies, or he said, she said, and a whole bunch of other things like that. Here's where we're starting. Netbooks. As you know, netbooks keeps cropping up in this newscast. Like it keeps cropping up everywhere these days because netbooks are cool. Everybody wants a netbook. I want a netbook. I don't have one yet, but I want a netbook. Everybody wants a netbook, and the people that have them want a newer netbook. I mean, that's how cool netbooks are. Anyway, here's the scoop. Over at informationweek.ca, they talk about, somebody goes on about the idea that Linux on netbooks is doomed. Doomed, I tell you. And why is Linux doomed on netbooks? Apparently because Windows 7 is around the corner. Whoop-de-flippin'-do. Anyway, what the argument that the person on the site brings forth is that, get it, he says that Linux is in the hands of people who can't think of anything creative or truly distinguished to do with it. Oh, for goodness sakes. Linux is in the hands of people who have revolutionized the information technology world, have actually made a company like Microsoft stand up and take notice. You actually think that Microsoft would be coming up with new products if there wasn't somebody out there who was, you know, giving them some form of competition? I'm not talking about financial competition, but making them look bad, perhaps is another way of putting it. But I digress, and I'm supposed to be reporting as opposed to giving you opinion. Anyway, that's his argument. Well, he also suggests that because Windows loaded netbooks will probably get cheaper and cheaper all the time, why would anyone want a Linux netbook? Well, over at Danny Webb, speaking of misinformation, there's another guy who rants and riffs about the idea that the return rates on netbooks is 4 times higher for Linux than it is for Windows. And he quotes the MSI Wind return numbers and the CEO of MSI Wind, which, by the way, I covered in this little newscast, I don't know, about 2-3 weeks ago or something like that. By the way, links to all these stories are at the bottom. You know how this stuff works by now. Anyway, what he fails to point out, or what he fails to argue, is this. MSI is actually a small player in the netbook field. Asus and Acer have got this industry pretty much wrapped up at the moment with at least 80% of the netbooks that are sold. And if you remember, Asus said that there is absolutely no difference in the return rates between Linux notebooks, or netbooks rather, versus Windows netbooks. And that people just like those guys just as well. So there you go. It depends on who you talk to. Over at Computer World, the Stephen J. Von Nichols, cyber cynic, looked at Windows 7, you know, the supposed Linux killer. Isn't it funny that we're looking at Linux killers now? I think this is hilarious. Anyway, Windows 7, he looked at it, and he declares that it's basically just warmed over Windows Vista. That's what Windows 7 is, warmed over Windows Vista. And nobody likes Vista anyway, and Vista is this big, sluggish, horrible monster, which is why they're loading XP on netbooks. And XP, according to Linux Watch over at eWeek, they took a look at it, and they sort of agree with old Stephen in the sense, there's a guy named there, Henry Kingman, who says that he looked at it, and the performance of Windows XP on the netbooks that they've looked at is pitiful and slow, and that nobody who uses these things versus one of the Linux ones actually comes away thinking that it's any better. And in fact, it's a more pitiful OS than Linux in the sense that it's not as feature-filled, and it's not as fast, and let's face it, it's just not as good an experience running Windows XP on one of these netbooks. So, depends on who you believe. There's this big fight going on, you know. It's like Windows is better on netbooks, Linux is better on netbooks. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? I'm putting my money on Linux in the long run. Anyway, over at OS Static, I'm just going to make that one fairly short. They talk about a new version of OpenOffice.org. It's a smaller, slimmer version of .org, which boots up faster, or starts up faster, I should say, and requires less resources than the giant OpenOffice.org. Over at LinuxDevices.com, they have a story where they talk about the Linux smartphone shipment market, and they mention that Q3 2008 over Q3 2007, there has been a 49% increase in Linux smartphone sales, or shipments, I should say. Now, that still only accounts for 5.1% of the marketplace, 5.1%, I should say, of the marketplace, but the numbers, they're on the rise. They're on the rise. And they also mentioned that with the advent of the famous Google Android phones and the excitement that surrounds it, you're going to see a heck of a lot more Linux phones, and those numbers will go up quite dramatically. And finally, we often talk about open standards and open formats here. Over at Science Daily, there's an article that talks about the coming of a digital dark age. This is something that I fear a great deal, which is this. All this information that we're accumulating, digital photographs, digital documents, digital records, basically the records of our civilization today, are these things even going to be accessible 50 years from now? And that depends. That depends on whether we adopt and embrace open formats today to make sure that we can actually read these things. Proprietary formats, like Microsoft Office proprietary formats and other proprietary formats, bad, bad, bad. Go read the article over at Science Daily and take note, because this is important. And if you have any say in the matter, and you do have a say in the matter, contact your governments, contact your schools, contact your elected officials, and let them know that they should be embracing open formats and open standards when it comes to the documents that we are archiving for today and for the future. As you can tell, I've got a cold, so I'm wrapping it up. I'm done. And boy, I'm done. Need a drink. Coffee. Oh, I'm done, really. Bye.